Desiree's on fire tonight. Holy cow. She's worked
And
up.
we're live, and Desiree is on fire. It is Memorial Day weekend. Welcome to SPSM Chat. We're so excited for you to be here. I am particularly, I know I say that I get excited, and the truth is I do. And we don't pick it, if I'm not excited about a topic, we don't do it. But I'm really very thrilled because tonight we're going to be talking about an issue that I personally advocate for a lot. This is fraught with perils for us. As Bart will note, we really have to avoid the monologuing, and I could go off, but we have a very special guest tonight. So tonight we're going to be talking about borderline personality disorder because of its incredible high risk for suicide in comparison with other mental health disorders. And we're going to talk about how borderline personality disorder folks are really coming together, lots of stakeholders, to create change using social media, to try to save lives and to try to make the world a healthier place if you have this diagnosis. And tonight we have a great guest for you, and I'm going to give him a minute to say hello. Everybody say hello to your favorite and my favorite, Carl Dunn Jr. Oh. There you are, Carl.
Well, hi. Hi, April. Hi, everybody. And if anybody's out in the audience on Tweet Chat with borderline personality disorder, a special welcome. So we're hoping a few friends are out there. And I guess, do you want me to introduce myself? I'm Carl Dunn.
About BPD Chat too.
Okay. Well, I'm Carl Dunn. I'm a certified peer specialist in Houston. I've dealt with my own depression and ADHD, and I have a family member with borderline personality disorder, which is how I got involved in the whole area of BPD, as we call it. And so I started, one of the best things that happened to me, I started meeting a lot of people with this diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and I realized I liked them very much. And so I started hanging out and meeting families, and it's been a really good experience. And I realized somewhere along the way that I'm an emotionally sensitive person myself. I don't have any of the criteria of BPD, but one of the things, as far as BPD chat, a friend of mine in England, Sue Sibbald, we were all hanging out about over 3 years ago, and she and another young woman had the idea of starting a chat around borderline personality disorder. And so I've been a co-moderator at different times, and over a year ago, Sue decided she was so busy that I ended up taking over. She wanted it to continue, we all did, and I ended up taking over being the facilitator of BPD Chat. So it's Sundays at 9 p.m. Central Time. In the U.S. We have a lot of English folks who are on the chat. It's international. And so it's really a chance for people with BPD to express themselves and be around other people who have this diagnosis. And a lot of people don't have a lot of information sometimes, and sometimes the information they have is pretty negative. So it's a chance for people to be, our motto is you're not alone, and people talk about finding that they are not alone, that there are other people with similar experiences, and that, knowing that other people understand my feelings. Somebody said it's one place where you can say what you feel and know that somebody will actually understand. So it's.
And we're going to talk about what that disorder is, but that is extremely specifically to that disorder. Having people validate and get what you feel and get how you experience something is really important. It's important to all human beings, but it's really healing, I think, in this particular case.
Yeah, and I think we all have this deep human need to be understood, heard and understood by another person, and so especially people with BPD have that need because a lot of times they don't get that elsewhere.
And we'll come back. I'm going to finish the introductions, and we're going to circle back to that because I want to talk about. We're going to have a whole section on misunderstandings, and I want to talk about that more because I think it's so important. I want to let you know, I think I about started bawling, and like my eyes are like, and I didn't stage Schmitz. I didn't start crying. I really wanted to when you were talking about just, you know, that when you come on, you can know that there's going to be somebody like you. I think one of the important things that social media can do, and it does this with folks with lived experience of suicide attempt, which there's a lot of sort of crossover with the borderline personality disorder community and the lived experience community, to know that your experience, there is a universal piece of your experience, is really important because you've been told by a whole lot of people that it's you, and it's not. That what's happening is inside of you, and nobody else really gets it. Let me introduce the rest of the crew, though, because I'm really excited. Back again this week, everybody, it's Bart Andrews!
Oh, good. Happy Sunday evening, everybody. Dr. Bart Andrews, Vice President of Clinical Operations at Behavioral Health Response in St. Louis, Missouri. You can reach me.
Award-winning behavioral health response.
Award-winning. We've gotten several awards this year, so we're pretty excited about that. So I'm really very excited. You can reach me at at Bart Andrews. I'm getting that out there, April. I'm trying to remember to say where people can reach me, at Bart Andrews on Twitter. And I'm very excited to say that BHR was accepted into the Zero Suicide Academy. And so I am very, very, very excited about that. I'm gonna, some of my folks and I are going to Baltimore at the end of June with one of the vice presidents of our local community health agencies to start a Zero Suicide campaign in the eastern region of Missouri. So very excited, very grateful for that opportunity, and as always, a joy to be here with SPSM, and love Carl, and I'm looking forward to the chat tonight.
Yeah, as we're getting ready to get rolling on the chat, I have to tell you that Carl is very special to us. So first of all, Carl was on our AAS 15 social media team. Carl has a specific way about him that is particularly wonderful. So we're getting warmed up for the chat, and I think Carl asked one beautiful, sweet, short, open-ended question, and Bart Andrews and I were off for about 15 minutes. So this, I think for us, this is going to be a more challenging Twitter chat just because of the emotionality of the topic involved, how we sort of feel about this issue. But I think, do we have our first question up, Carl? I'm not sure if I know I tried to give us just a few minutes before we got to it because I knew we would want to introduce ourselves. And I don't see topic 1 yet. That's right, okay. So Carl, like, I'm going to go ahead and bring you up for topic 1 anyway, because I think this is a chat that has some background to it. Can you explain a little bit about what borderline personality disorder is?
Okay. Well, it's at its simplest, I think it's a problem regulating emotions. And, you know, in the DSM and the diagnostic manual, there are these 9 criteria, and if you have 5 or more of them, you're diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or BPD as we call it. Marshall Linehan talks about it in a certain way, as she's the creator of dialectical behavior therapy, and she talks about 5 areas of dysregulation. So the first area is emotional dysregulation, and so emotions spike quickly. The emotional thermostat of somebody with BPD is usually higher than the average person all the time. And it takes a lot longer for someone to come back down from an emotion. In some cases, it may take hours instead of minutes.
And it's a real biological thing. It's like they're not faking it. Like, it's really harder for them than an average person.
Yeah, and that side is biological, but you know, people can learn skills to regulate their emotions and so forth. And then the next part of that, if you imagine that you can't bring yourself down from an emotion by yourself very easily. You look outside yourself for ways to bring yourself down. And so behavioral dysregulation is, people find alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, ways to bring themselves down from an emotion and feel better. And self-harm for people with BPD often will bring the person down from an emotion and help them to feel better. And a suicide attempt for people with BPD can often result in bringing their emotions down, and people report feeling better after an attempt often. And then suicidal thinking. People often think about suicide, and it helps bring down emotions, helps people feel better. So these are unhealthy ways to deal with things, but they are effective. And then there's interpersonal dysregulation, and so people with BPD often have real problems in relationships, chaotic relationships, unstable relationships. And then there's self-dysregulation, and it's identity problems or knowing who you are, having a shifting sense of yourself, not, and then in the extreme, some people don't know their preferences, their likes or dislikes, their values. And then there's there's cognitive dysregulation is the last one, and that's under stress, people with BPD may dissociate or feel disconnected from themselves or feel disconnected from the world. And under stress, people with BPD may have distorted thinking, say paranoia or extreme black and white thinking. And so, there's a lot of facets, and not everybody has all the different problems with this, but it's people with BPD often live in enormous emotional pain, and so it's really not easy to live a life this way.
Yeah, Marshall Linehan says that having borderline personality disorder is like being an emotional burn victim. When you have feelings, because there can be extreme sort of dissociation from your feelings, and then intense feelings. So when you feel things, you feel everything big, and everything sort of on a certain level hurts. And it is, this is why 3 to 10% of people with borderline personality disorder die by suicide. It's one of our mental health disorders. It ties for the top fatality rate, so lack of treatment for this is really dangerous. People die from this.
Absolutely. And and there's some psychological autopsies that people have done, and looking at how many people have died by suicide have BPD, and they found 9% to 33% in some studies. All those who died by suicide probably had borderline personality disorder, so it's an enormous problem.
And I'm going to just answer one question on the Twitters. Desiree Stage says, I'm really interested to discuss overlaps in bipolar, borderline, mood disorder spectrum. So let me just really, really quickly give you a rundown. When you have borderline personality disorder, it's a secondary disorder that you develop, and the first thing that you have to have is some sort of sensitivity to regulating your mood. And what I loved was when we were talking about having heightened emotional sensitivity in the warm-up, and Carl was talking about having some, and that really came to my mind because of some neat things I think that happen in my brain. I have heightened emotional sensitivity, and if you have that and you experience especially more depression and things that are really painful, with something called invalidating environment. So your environment may be very abusive or very traumatic, or you just may have a really sensitive mood and a regular environment doesn't tell you, it doesn't give you good information about what to do with it. Either way, you learn, you develop the secondary set of problems, the borderline personality disorder, to help you cope. It's sort of like developing a secondary healthcare problem because the primary one doesn't get treated well. And that's how I like to explain it to patients. So that that primary mood disorder can be depression, like just garden variety, major depressive disorder, anxiety disorders. It can be PTSD. It can be a bipolar disorder, and you can have any of those regular mood disorders, mood and anxiety disorders, and then you will have borderline personality disorder on top of it. And for most of my patients, they have a regular mood anxiety disorder, usually a trauma like a PTSD, and usually substance abuse or impulse control problem like gambling, and borderline PD. So, I mean, by the time you get borderline PD, you usually have something else going on. And I hope that answers the question. I hope I didn't steal too much thunder from you there, Carl.
No, I agree with that, and I guess one thing you should say is that, I should say is that, sometimes people are confused and think that everybody, who has BPD self-harms. So, a lot of people do, but not everybody. And some people are confused and think that everybody with BPD also has PTSD, and that doesn't seem to be true. Some people do, some people don't. It often occurs, but not. There are a lot of cases where it doesn't.
Yeah, and so how you get there can be kind of complicated. But once you get there, what I like to tell my patients is, how you get there is one thing, but once you get there, now what? So once you have that disorder, then what do you do? And Carl, can you talk to a little bit about sort of what people's options are once they get diagnosed?
Well, the good news is that there's some effective evidence-based treatments for borderline personality disorder, and probably the most well-known one and well-researched one is dialectical behavior therapy. And so, which you could probably talk to better than I could, but it's basically you have a individual therapy, and you also have a group skills training, and you learn skills to regulate your emotions. You learn skills for interpersonal effectiveness, and skills for distress tolerance, to handle crisis situations, and you have phone coaching, and then your therapist also has a team consultation approach, which helps. And then there's mentalization-based therapy, which has been shown to be effective too. Unfortunately, that is, it's a great therapy. It's not available in most places. So.
Yeah, and one of the there are a couple of big problems that we talk about. And we'll talk about when we hit topic 2, and give us a couple minutes to get there. But one of the questions we're getting is, like, does this prevalence in the population change? What we know is that 1 out of every about 5 folks who get mental health treatment in a community mental health agency probably have borderline personality disorder. And then someone said, well, is this higher in an inmate population? Yes, BPD is higher in prison populations, because sometimes people do impulsive or chaotic things that get them in trouble with the law as a part of their disorder. And then it is higher in the military mental health populations that I serve. So any of your higher risk populations tend to have higher levels of borderline personality disorder. You've got, it's sort of a complex disorder that happens after a bunch of other stuff doesn't go right early on. So mood and anxiety stuff doesn't get treated, environment is either unhelpful or actively traumatic in different ratios, and then you get this disorder. I want to be really, really clear that if you get an evidence-based treatment like dialectic behavioral therapy, 80% of people who get that treatment are significantly better in 1 year. And as a person who's been providing this treatment for a really long time, I'm going to tell you that ratio is pretty spot on. And that is a really huge success rate. So when we think that maybe 1 in 10 could die by suicide, but 80% could get better, and most people are not getting correctly diagnosed and not getting correctly referred to treatment, like, that should trouble all of us at SPSM a whole lot. Before we move on to the next topic, Bart, what were your thoughts about what you heard?
So, I think such an important conversation. I think one of the things, when we talk about data, I think one of the things I've noticed is that you often see borderline personality disorder diagnosis more prevalent in institutions because of a bias, and also often we end up using the diagnosis when we don't like people. I'm going to be honest about that.
You need to explain that. Not everybody understands that.
So in other words, often diagnoses like personality disorders are often used by providers when they find themselves not liking the person they're working with. And that's actually one of the things that you often see is when clinicians have a negative reaction to somebody, one of the common things to say is that that person has access to or has a personality disorder. So I often think that you end up seeing the diagnosis used quite a bit in certain settings because they're in settings that are unpleasant and the folks they're working with are having a bad reaction to them. The other thing that I think is really interesting is there are a lot of folks that have symptoms of bipolar disorder who are very high functioning, and they're not hitting those institutions, and so they often don't end up with the diagnosis. They end up with depression diagnoses or anxiety diagnoses because often many therapists aren't very skilled at assessing for and putting all of the symptoms together. So you end up with a lot of misdiagnosis. And interestingly enough, sometimes clinicians, even when they recognize it, are afraid to give the diagnosis because they recognize the diagnosis has a lot of prejudice and discrimination attached to it, right? And so there are times, and I don't know if you ever run into this, Carl and April, but when I'm supervising folks, I'll say, well, I really don't want to give that diagnosis because the person's 17. Okay, well, right, so we're very young. So here we recognize that this diagnosis is a loaded diagnosis, that there's a tremendous amount of unfair prejudice and discrimination around the diagnosis. And so some clinicians are afraid to use it because it's a diagnosis that carries a lot of weight to it, which is so unfortunate because we don't give it, the person doesn't get an accurate diagnosis, and then we can't actually combat the prejudice and discrimination around it because we're trying to hide it or work around it. So I think that those are things that are really important. I think that, you guys haven't talked about this, but when I was in graduate school, the term that got thrown around constantly around persons with borderline personality disorder was therapist killer, right?
What?
These are the therapist killer.
Holy fuck! What?
You've never heard that before? Yeah. Oh yeah. So I think that. Yeah, so one of the things, and this is one of the things people do not realize, and I don't think a lot of providers realize that a lot of things they grew up with are these really horrible things, right? Don't carry too many borderlines because that'll kill you, right?
Yeah, never have more borderlines on your caseload than you have tits. Is the same.
Oh no. So there's this all. I mean, it's really interesting. So here's what's interesting. Think about this. When I was in graduate school, professors would say, "Well, if you really want to know about borderline personality disorder, watch Fatal Attraction."
Oh no. Right.
So the level of, and so I'm going to call providers out, and I've been doing that all week, and I've had some rather interesting exchanges this week. There's a tremendous amount of prejudice and discrimination out there, and certain diagnoses have that more than others. I think persons diagnosed with borderline personality disorder get more than their fair share of that. And I was telling this to April and Carl earlier. I'm completely opposed to the very concept of personality disorders as a diagnosis. It is, we're basically saying that not only do you have an illness, but your entire personality is fucked up, right? So you're not that you have cancer, you are a cancer. I mean, just the very category itself is pejorative, and I think a very unfortunate language. I know that when the 5 was being worked on, there's a big push to get it called emotional dysregulation and have it be in the mood disorders, which is where I really truly believe it belongs. We're going to use categories for it, and so I know that battle was lost. But I was really excited about that possibility. I think it's a much better, and I think it's a more useful and more helpful term, emotional dysregulation and disorders of emotional dysregulation. So that's my monologue. I hope my only one for the evening. Sorry.
Probably not. This is a really rich topic. It's really hard to not talk about it, in my opinion. So, Carl, the next big question that we have really flows directly from what Bart Andrews was talking about. What understandings versus misunderstandings about borderline personality disorder do you see perpetuated in the media or on social media?
Well, I think it comes from 2 sources, and one we've talked about is the clinical community, and but that bleeds into popular media, I think, as well. And Bart mentioned Fatal Attraction. I think that's the movie that gets brought up, unfortunately, a lot. It's a caricature. of somebody. It's not the real thing, and but I think what happens is there's a misunderstanding of motivation. And so we think, we have all these pejorative, negative ways of talking about people. It's in the media. Let's say just imagine for a minute somebody who's newly diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and their psychiatrist doesn't tell them much about it, which happens a lot. And so they go out and turn to the internet to find out. And yeah. They're probably horrified by what they read. There's
they
websites.
are. I'm going to tell you, my patients who Google about the disorder, if I don't give them a good place to go first, call me up in a panic. You can send somebody into a tailspin because it says that you are a nutso, Looney Tunes, therapist, killer, psychopath is what it says, basically. Anyway, go ahead.
Right. So, and the great word I think Bart may have mentioned already is manipulative. And, that gets hung on people, and attention getting. And it basically, if you go out to social media or look for information, it may say, bad people, that they're violent, and that if you know somebody with BPD, you should run away. And there's a lot of sites out there like that. They're inaccurate information. These are myths or stereotypes. And a lot of these messages, as I said, I think originate in the clinical community. Because mental health and healthcare professionals often talk about people with BPD in this way. And
we talk about them, we don't talk to them, and we don't talk with them. It's on us. Sorry.
Yes, they don't. No, I'm right with you. Yeah, they're not in the room when you're saying this. Unfortunately, sometimes professional training repeats these inaccuracies about people with BPD. People with BPD are often treated negatively when they're, contacting healthcare professional for services in emergency rooms, for instance. So the other thing that happens, you see in the media and in clinical community, is seeing people with BPD as untreatable. It's not true, but for some reason, that was when there wasn't effective therapy 30 years ago, maybe. People had problems treating people with borderline personality disorder, but these days there's dialectical behavior therapy and so forth. There's good treatment out there. And we talked a little bit about beforehand not giving the diagnosis of borderline personality. I can't tell you how many people who are patients, for some reason clinicians don't give the diagnosis. And I don't know any other diagnosis where that's the case. If you had depression, they'd tell you you've got depression or something.
Yeah. Or they actively only give them one of their diagnoses, and they don't give all of them. And so I was just saying to you on the chat, so I run a dialectic behavioral therapy group for folks with BPD, and I have it has sort of a 6-month cycle. So I have referrals. I was going through my referral list, getting ready. We have a wait list, so getting ready for our September group. And all I did Friday was either coach with patients I currently have with BPD who are in my DBT group, or interview people for the DBT group. And the majority of the people that I interviewed that day, one after another, and then, this was all day and one day in a row, no one had told them. No one had confirmed it. No one had told them. A couple of them are like, I've heard of it and I've suspected all along, but no one would ever look me in the face and say that's what I had. And that's like, can you imagine a medical disorder where no one will tell you you have that, and they won't offer you treatment? They'll give you the actively inadequate treatment and not tell you what you really have, and not tell you what treatment works. Sorry, it bothers me.
Yeah. And so many people are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and maybe because it's erroneously thought that's a more hopeful diagnosis. That's not actually true, because borderline personality disorder is quite a hopeful diagnosis if you get effective treatment.
Correct. And Carl, if you're bipolar, you're going to have it all your life. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm gonna add to that because Carl, what I've seen psychiatrists do is they give bipolar disorder diagnosis to persons with borderline personality disorder because they want to use mood stabilizers. They're hoping they can knock this person down with medications, and since there's no cause for that with borderline personality disorder, they'll use a bipolar diagnosis so they can load them up on mood stabilizers and hoping that they're going to knock them down and get that affect under control. So they use it as, I call it reverse diagnosing. I want to use this medication, and so I'm going to use this diagnosis so that I can then use this medication. And I saw a lot of it. I saw a lot of it at the VA, and I don't think, and I don't know, my review of the data on pharmaceutical treatment, psychopharm treatment of borderline personality disorder, the results are not great, right? DBT has really good results. I don't know if medicine as an adjunct is particularly helpful. You might know more about that and can comment on it.
You might say that question again, real quick, Bart.
Oh, so in other words, does your thoughts on medication and the use of medication for borderline personality disorder as an adjunct to therapy? Have you found it helpful? Does it help folks, particularly if there aren't, if there isn't clear signs of depression or anxiety separate?
Basically, talk about medication and BPD.
Maybe thank you, April. Wow.
It's hard, isn't it?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, there's a lot of polypharmacy that goes on. A lot of people with BPD are on many medications, and there's no targeted medication for borderline personality disorder. The FDA doesn't have any medication that says this is for borderline personality disorder specifically. And so, but people, as Bart was saying, people do get put on a lot of medications, and it's probably, that's not, when there's effective psychotherapy out there, that's not the, best thing to happen. And one of the things, people often get put on benzodiazepines, and that just exacerbates the problem with impulsivity for people. So,
and let's explain why that does that. Because benzos, Xannies, bennies. Right? Why would that help? Why would that make impulsivity worse?
You're asking me? I'm not.
Okay, I'll take it because I want to. So basically, what happens, and I even have patients who say this, like, I don't really want to do, because DBT therapy works really well, but it is an intense commitment on the part of the patient and the therapist who works for them, and you have to really have a certain love for each other and I mean that like the professionally appropriate sense. You have to really love it because it'll be tough, it will be hard sometimes for both the therapist and the patient. You have to go to group every week. You have individual. You have regular coaching calls. You will still need some medication, but often folks with borderline personality disorder often need much less medication than what they're on. And when you give them Xanax, people will learn to take Xanax instead of using a skill. So Xanax sort of, if you take a pill and you don't feel as anxious, but you don't learn how to behave really effectively to solve the problem, you feel better. But when the Xanax wears off, you still have the problem. But in the meantime, you're developing an addiction to the Xanax.
Mm-hmm.
When you really need a skill, you're anxious because you have to talk with your boss about something. Well, you really need the skill to actually talk with your boss and negotiate something. And so the Xanax is one thing, but the skill is another. Does that help? Does that help, Carl?
That's great. That's a great explanation, I think. And so, people use people with BPD often have other co-occurring disorders. I think we've said that. And so sometimes medication is helpful for treating those co-occurring disorders. But it's sad to see a lot of people who are just really have too many medications.
Oh. So. Yeah, and what I love doing, like, I hate to say this because I know this sounds a little cheesy, but a lot of times what I say is I want to tell you the good news. The good news is you're not bipolar, which is a genetic-based lifelong condition that gets worse as you age and can only be regulated with medication and will always kick you in the ass a little bit. You just have something called borderline personality disorder, and the therapy for that's pretty intense, but in a year or two you could not have that disorder anymore. and you could be much, much, much better, and you could have a really good life where you are healthier as you age. So it's sort of like the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. If you have type 2 diabetes, there are things that you can change so that you don't have any diabetes. If you have type 1 diabetes, you're stuck with it, and it will be harder to manage as you age. And I just try to explain to patients, like, that's the actual reality for treatment for you, your actual prognosis and course. And let me share with you all these places you can go online that are not scary, that have accurate information. Because I say, don't Google it. You're going to be so upset if you Google this disorder. But do go to borderlinepersonalitydisorder.com, which has wonderful resources. Wikipedia does not have a bad write-up. They do okay. So the DBT and BPD write-ups on Wikipedia are pretty good. And I also try to recommend for them and their family different books. And it's hard. It is so hard to get media written from the point of view of someone with lived experience of BPD because there are so few first-person accounts, and especially so few first-person accounts of people who are in recovery. But even though there are many people in recovery. Could you talk more about that?
Well, yeah, it is. I think we were talking about that earlier. It's really a lot of people don't want to be identified publicly with the illness. And, which makes sense, if you're employed somewhere, you don't want your employer to know, and so forth. And, there are celebrities out there with depression or bipolar, but not too many celebrities out there with borderline personality disorder. The only people who've really come out are Marsha Linehan has come out, and Brandon Marshall, who's a wide receiver now, I believe, for the New York Jets, and they've both been very helpful in talking about borderline personality disorder.
But that's like 2 people,
right.
Even though this is like a super common disorder. I'm sorry,
but
this drives me nuts.
I know people who are very successful, and they're successful therapists, for instance, and they have BPD. And so, but, they have reasons for not coming out. It's unfortunate that people feel, I understand completely why, but it's unfortunate that people feel, that they can't.
Yeah, it's so stigmatized, and I mean, goodness knows, like, I'm the person who hates the stigma word because of the way I think it's used, but this is one of those things where if you were going to pick a time where stigma really is the thing that gets in the way, and it's stigma among clinicians, we need to educate clinicians better that there is an effective treatment that works, that people recover from this, that the skills that, like, I love teaching DBT groups. I mean, I teach the skills group, because the skills we learn, I mean, they're just good skills to have, quite honestly. I mean, you don't have to have the disorder for those skills to really improve your effectiveness in life. And there are things that can be done, and you can have a really good life. And it's so much easier than, say, if you had, for example, schizophrenia, which is way harder to manage. But for whatever reason, I mean, how did borderline PD become the boogeyman of mental health disorders? It's something happened. Bart, do you have any thoughts about?
Well, I do, and I think this is an excellent example, April, why it's important not to ever use the word stigma and to use prejudice and discrimination instead.
Oh, very good.
So I think that when I look at the history around, just think about the term, as I said, personality disorder, that it's something that belongs to the person, not something they're fighting or suffering from, but it's something about them, who they are. It's a stain, right? Just the language we use is staining. And providers, in this sense, we've put all of the pain and agony and the difficulty on the person and blame them for it. And so what that has allowed is providers to then run rampant with prejudice and discrimination and stereotypes around people who suffer from the disorder. And those stereotypes, those prejudices, and the discriminatory behavior is not in any way challenged because it's actually ingrained into the diagnosis itself, right? So in fact, what we've done is we've actually, there's a concept called cast and concrete views of human behavior. We've actually we've put these descriptors, cast them in concrete, tied them around the person, and pushed them off the ledge, so to speak, right? And when we use the word stigma, we attach it to the person, and that means providers don't have to look at themselves and say, oh, I wonder what it is about the way that I'm thinking about this or that I'm doing that may be contributing to the ongoing stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination and challenges for this disorder, right? It's a way for us to distance ourselves from being responsible for something that we created. I want to be very clear. Persons with borderline personality disorder did not create this prejudice and discrimination. They didn't do it. We did it. It's the treatment system that created the current dynamics around this disorder. So when we ask how do we change it, my 2 cents is let's point the finger in the right direction. Let's take a look at ourselves and figure out what we can do around our language and our culture to make sure that these vulnerable folks, these folks who, if anybody needs our compassion, understanding, it's this group, and we need to own that and own that we have not done. Some of us, I think DBT, and I'm monologuing, and I want to share this, but when we have a local DBT expert in Missouri, Rhonda Wright, and Rhonda is amazing. When I went to her DBT training probably around 6 years ago, it changed my life. The core principles of DBT, I think, translate so well to everything that we do. Yeah. I don't think in any way it's specific to just working with folks with borderline personality disorder, but the concepts around intimacy and non-judgment and validation and liking and love and all of these things being a part of the therapeutic process, and how much of the bad treatment is about our attitudes and our prejudice and stereotypes and how it impacts the people we're working with. So let's start with us, and let's take a look at what we're doing as providers, and let's stop doing that. In the words of Bob Newhart, stop it.
I'm reading some of the things that people are talking about. About the mental health system sort of being a little effed up in that it doesn't when providers feel overwhelmed by a disorder or by the needs of the disorder, that we tend to act badly and we don't tend to do things that are helpful and effective. And one of the things that happens with borderline personality disorder is, even though it is really common, you almost never get really good training in graduate school on how to treat it. So you have to get really expensive, difficult to get specialized training and supervision for quite some time in order to be good at it, even though there is a huge need for it. So there's a real barrier to getting to the treatment or getting to the people who have the therapy skills so that your mental health problem does not overwhelm my emotions. And so getting to a therapist who is safe giving you help is a pretty big barrier. But we like to blame the patients for that instead of saying, why don't we have a DBT clinic in every major city? Why don't we have DBT-trained folks in every inpatient setting where a lot of folks are going to be who have BPD? I mean, why don't we? And why are we getting mad at patients? Why are we blaming patients when the system fails them, or the therapy fails them, or the therapist fails them? Because one of the underlying assumptions of DBT is that a patient can't fail therapy, or a consumer. There are lots of, I know that folks sort of are not sure about which model of language, and the truth is I sort of switch based on the environment that I'm in. But I mean, for the person who's receiving the therapy, they can't fail at therapy. We would never say that you fail at being a primary care patient. But for some reason, about mental health, we say that. And we don't say, well, if I were tracking the outcomes and I kept doing something and you didn't get better, that may have something to do with me or the system or the therapy. And we don't do that. We don't track outcomes, and we don't hold ourselves accountable. I think that's a big deal. Carl, we took it over. Bart and I told you it was going to happen.
Good for you.
What are your thoughts on the things we said?
Well, as I was cheering you on, and I think that, to Marshall Linehan's credit, dialectical behavior therapy has overturned some of these negative assumptions, and you pointed this out. And I think, for a lot of people, it's turned on the light. It's demonstrated that people with BPD can get better. There are good outcomes, for one thing, but DBT stresses these positive assumptions about people with BPD, and saying clients are doing the best they can. If they could do better, they would. and talking about it in rather than having a character flaw, people with BPD are simply lacking skills, which they can learn. And so the more DBT gets out there, the more assumptions I think get challenged. And a lot of people, a lot of clinicians I know have, when they encounter DBT, somehow the light bulb went on and they started looking at things as people were not manipulative and attention-getting. They were seeing underneath that people were in intense emotional pain and trying to get out of it. So.
And can you talk a little bit about, we talk about this manipulative word, and I'm always a little baffled by that, because I think if you're manipulative, you get what you want and people like giving it to you. But if you have BPD, often you try to get what you want and you're very unskillful, so people react badly and keep it from you, even though you need it.
Well, I like to say I'm much more manipulative than all my friends with BPD. I'm just much better at it, and in some ways, and that's just a problem that DBT has interpersonal effectiveness skills for getting what you want. We're all trying to get what we want, and it's just that some people just haven't learned those skills. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I like to tell patients, like, no, I want you to get what you want. Everybody in life should, if they want something and it's reasonable, they should be able to figure out a way to get that done, and I will help you get what you want out of life as long as it's reasonable, it doesn't hurt anybody else. I will really help you. But we have to learn some skills for doing it, because I want you to actually become manipulative instead of being. I think we only call people manipulative when they try and we don't like it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Someone said, funnily, I think knowing a little about external BPD stigma helped me talk about it more openly once I got over the diagnosis. I can't say enough. This is one of those disorders where I strongly believe that psychoeducation, the awareness of this is so poor in comparison with many other mental health disorders that even just a sort of a basic awareness about what the disorder is, what the treatment options are, what the prejudices and discriminations in the system are that keep folks from getting well. Just like a little bit of education among clinicians and patients will go a long way to solving problems. And I think Bart would agree with this. When I found out that there was training I could get so that my patient's pain did not overwhelm me and I could effectively help them and help myself, it was what I was looking for. It was all the doors open, and I said, this is wonderful. Thank God, because clinicians really are trying their best too in the middle of not being effective, and they really do want to do the therapy that works, but many of them have not been properly trained, much like in suicide prevention. True?
Well, yeah. Yes. Yeah, and I think there's a commonality that I've seen between the BPD community and the suicide prevention community. There's a lack of research dollars for both the communities. There's a lack of required training for most mental health professionals in suicide prevention about borderline personality disorder. And there's also this small dedicated community around suicide prevention. There's a similar small dedicated compassionate community around borderline personality disorder professionals.
So what kinds of, and I feel terrible, I've lost a little bit of the thread. I know that we're in our last questions, but what kinds of things could we do as an SPSM community to help use social media to change this? If we thought that maybe better education about borderline PD might save lives that would be otherwise lost to suicide, what could we do?
Well, that's a really good question. I think getting out there and just talking about it more. I think, somebody, actually I got to say hi to Alison Cameron. She's here from England on the SPSM chat, and I just want her to know that I've seen her out there and that I'm amazed she's up at 3 a.m. in the morning or whatever it is there, 4 a.m. now. But she said something today in BPD chat, and she said, it's interact, interact, interact. It's the power of authentic conversation that creates a groundswell. So I thought that, and she's doing a lot of peer support and presenting to people, and I think she got it right. It really, you can use social media to break down distance between people. So I think when people with BPD get out there, and we're trying to do that a little bit more, I mean, there are people with blogs and all sorts of, YouTube videos and different things, but getting more people out there with who have borderline personality disorder telling their story is helpful. But getting people, everybody on this chat to really, start to think about how they can work with this and do something, around borderline personality disorder, whether it's a conversation with someone, or if they're in the clinical community, talking to their peers about how do we change this. I think that's part of it. So
we getting a cue to tell us a little bit more about BPD chat, what it is, when it is, and what we can do to support y'all. You guys come in a little earlier in the day than we do.
Right. Well, it's Sundays. It's at 3 p.m. Central Time in the U.S., as I always say, since we have people internationally. And so, what do they do? Well, we usually choose a topic, and people talk about, that topic. We at the start of the thing, we give links to suicide prevention resources in each country. We ask people to preface their tweets with TW for trigger warning, because people seem to like that. That seems to help people stay safe. And I think what makes a good community is, people with BPD don't often get a chance to talk about their experience, and so we provide a safe space that people can come together and talk about that. And
they do a damn fine job. I've sat in on several chats. It is a damn fine, well-run chat with really great community members who say good things. Like, it is damn fine. It's up there in my top 3 favorite chats.
And I don't know if I mentioned on here, I think I mentioned we were talking, a lot of people are anonymous. They have eked out their own sense of privacy on social media, and they have an anonymous account or something, maybe 50% of the people. And so people feel comfortable coming on. They've figured out, what's their comfort level. And many people come on and they don't know that BPD is a hopeful diagnosis, and some of the they don't know about the effective therapy we've been talking about. And for a lot of people, it's still that they can't get that therapy. So that's a big, big issue, that even people, it's hard to get the diagnosis and get accurately diagnosed. It's also hard to get the effective therapy they need. And so we have people who don't have, some people haven't talked to other people with BPD before. That happens a lot, and so here's where they do that. And there are some people on our chat who don't have social supports, many. So having someone else to talk to is valuable. And a few people don't go out of the house much. BPD chat is one of the few chances they have for social interaction support. So, as far as how people here can help and support, it's just, part of it's we'd love to have people here come on BPD chat. We had a couple people today who came on, Charlotte, Coach Charlotte, and
cool.
Gosh, I'm blanking on her name, but the lady from Ireland. Anyway, so her last name's Montgomery.
Okay.
anyway, so it was really nice to have a couple people on, who hadn't been there before. We get that so often. And we welcome professionals to come on and kind of leave their hat at the door, but come in and just hang out as real people. And, sometimes people, give a little bit of their expertise, but it's basically a chat for people with borderline personality disorder, and we welcome other people to come on. So if people here would love, we're inviting you to come on and to, kind of cross-pollinate the communities here, because I think that's, I think getting people from the BPD chat community over to the SPSM community, is helpful.
There's definitely a lot of shared needs. So there's a lot of need to get clinicians better educated, to get healthcare systems better educated. We have Alison Cameron, she was named one of the 50 inspirational women in health in the UK last year because of advocating for this disorder and for having better treatment. And because there is shared risk, there's shared media problems, there are shared advocacy needs. I feel like we do benefit. We already do work together, and I feel like we should continue to support each other in what we're doing. The circle rises together. We will improve the healthcare system by helping each other out.
Yeah. And one of the things that SPSM has done so well is breaking down barriers between, researcher clinicians and people with lived experience, and you name it, crisis center people. And so, I love that, and I want people, in BPD chat to be able to do more of that there as well, and to start using social media in the way that some of the people in SPSM are doing.
Absolutely, and if there are members of that community, we really want to invite you in the last couple minutes. If there are members of that community, especially that have some collaboration ideas, you feel like that can come over to sort of this sort of stream of the conversation, let us know. Let us help you set that up. We are very happy to collaborate and work together, especially talking about the need to get more trained providers. I just saw more of that. Let's figure out how to talk about that more. I think BPD chat does a good job, and I think the DBT sort of training does a good job of helping everybody show up collaboratively, because in the end, at BPD chat or at SPSM, and this are my final thought, and then I'll check in with all of you, we're all just trying to keep people alive long enough to get better and have a life worth living. And we all want the same thing. There's no reason why we shouldn't be using media to work together. And that's my final thought. Bart Andrews, any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, final thoughts. One, Carl, I adore you, and the way that you present things is just so centered and balanced, and there's a sense of mindfulness about you that I just truly appreciate. I love social media, and one of the things that I love about social media is what we just saw tonight, and the biggest advantage I've seen is that providers think that when they get feedback from clients in session, they're getting good feedback, and they're not. There's a huge power differential when people are in treatment and they're afraid to truly speak their mind, because if they speak their mind, they get labeled as manipulative, demanding, resistant, complainers. On social media and Twitter, I get to see people with lived experience truly speak their mind. And what I really love it is I see providers on the defensive, right? And that is one of the things that I really like to see, because social media helps you look. I do not. I think that we need a level playing field, and I think one of the things that's been going on for years is that providers, and one of the comments I saw in the thread was, well, there's a lot of providers that are dicks, and that's true. There are some providers that are dicks, but providers are as much a victim of the culture that we're in as the folks that are being prejudiced and discriminated against, right? Nobody stopped and challenged us and shone a light on this stuff, and so there's things that we've accepted in social media, and this is in every presentation I do now, I say to providers, get on Twitter, lurk, see what people with lived experience are talking about, because you're going to find them talking about providers, and you're not going to be thrilled about what they're saying often. Now, sometimes they say wonderful things, but listen, we need to really start hearing what people are saying, and where they're saying it in safe places where they can really talk about what it's like. One of the things, being a part of a trauma-informed care community, and this is one of the things that hit me right between the eyes, treatment can be traumatic. And until clinicians recognize that we can traumatize, then we got a problem. So thank you, Carl, and I'm moving it on.
And I'm going to I like that soundbite particularly. If we don't become more effective, especially with borderline personality disorder, treatment can become traumatic. Let's have conversations that reverse that. Any final thoughts from you, Carl?
Well, one thing I wanted to just thank everybody who came on tonight, and especially people who I didn't get to talk to with borderline personality disorder, because I know there's some people I know out in the Twitter sphere. But I think this has been a great chat, and it really has, people have talked. I love how Bart has talked about clinicians and really the power differential, and what you talked about, April, what we need to keep doing to educate professionals and to move things forward, really.
That was wonderful. Everybody wants to hug you. They're giving you the big fist bumps on social media. Well, you've had another hour with us. I didn't cry, not even when the camera was on me, Des, and you can't prove otherwise because you didn't see. This has been another SPSM. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter at SPSM Chat or hashtag SPSM. Do check out hashtag BPD Chat at 3 p.m. on Sundays, especially you, Julie Sorrell, because you aren't going to be in bed yet, and it's a cool-ass chat. Let's all remember that the truth is we all really do want the same thing, and we should all be absolutely insistent that we have a healthcare system that serves patients better and that helps clinicians feel effective in helping people, because that's why we got into this job to begin with. Let's use our media power to bring that about, and everybody have a good night. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.